Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. Today we're turning to the works of the American writer Ambrose Bierce. A veteran of many of the most brutal battles of the American Civil War, which remains the deadliest war in U.S. history, Ambrose Bierce is regarded as an early influencer on American realism and a major influence on later writers like Ernest Hemingway. Traumatized by the horror of the war, Bierce's stories are dark, brutal, and dripping with a cruelly humorous sense of irony. Yesterday we concluded our adaptation of An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, his best-known story, and today we're bringing you the first of 3 parts in One of the Missing, a similarly dark story shot through with that particular brutal thread of dark humor that is Bierce's signature. It begins in the late days of the war, as a Union scout from the northern states prepares to make an observation of the enemy Confederacy's battle line. Jerome Searing, a private soldier of General Sherman's army, then confronting the enemy at and about Kennesaw Mountain, Georgia, turned his back upon a small group of officers with whom he had been talking in low tones, stepped across a light line of earthworks, and disappeared in a forest. None of the men in line behind the works had said a word to him, nor had he so much as nodded to them in passing, but all who saw understood that this brave man had been entrusted with some perilous duty. Jerome Searing, though a private, did not serve in the ranks. He was detailed for service at division headquarters, being listed on the rolls as an orderly. Orderly is a word covering a multitude of duties. An orderly might be a messenger, a clerk, an officer's servant, anything. He may perform services for which no provision is made in orders and army regulations. Their nature may depend upon his aptitude, upon favor, upon accident. Private Searing, an incomparable marksman, young, hardy, intelligent, and insensible to fear, was a scout. The general commanding his division was not content to obey orders blindly without knowing what was in his front, even when his command was not on detached service, but formed a fraction of the line of the army. Nor was he satisfied to receive his knowledge through the customary channels. He wanted to know more than he was told by the corps commander and the collision of pickets and skirmishers. Hence, Jerome Searing, with his extraordinary daring, his woodcraft, his sharp eyes, and truthful tongue. On this occasion, his instructions were simple: to get as near the enemy's lines as possible and learn all that he could. In a few minutes, he had arrived at the picket line. The men on duty there lying in groups of 2 and 4 behind little banks of earth scooped out of a slight depression in which they lay, their rifles protruding from the green boughs with which they had masked their small defenses. The forest extended without a break toward the front, so solemn and silent that only by an effort of imagination could it be conceived as populous with armed men, alert and vigilant, a forest formidable with possibilities of battle. Pausing a moment in one of these rifle pits to apprise the men of his intention, Searing crept stealthily forward on his hands and knees and was soon lost to view in a dense thicket of underbrush. One of the men spoke after him as he passed.
That is the last of him. I wish I had his rifle. Those fellows will hurt some of us with it.
Searing crept on, taking advantage of every accident of ground and growth to give himself better cover. His eyes penetrated everywhere. His ears took note of every sound. He stilled his breathing, and at the cracking of a twig beneath his knees, stopped his progress and hugged the earth. It was slow work, but not tedious. The danger made it exciting, but by no physical sign was the excitement manifest. His pulse was as regular, his nerves were as steady, as if he were trying to trap a sparrow. It seems a long time, he thought, but I cannot have come very far. I am still alive. He smiled at his own method of estimating distance and crept forward. A moment later, he suddenly flattened himself upon the earth and lay motionless, minute after minute. Through a narrow opening in the bushes, he had caught sight of a small mound of yellow clay, one of the enemy's rifle pits. After some little time, he cautiously raised his head, inch by inch, then his body upon his hands, spread on each side of him, all the while intently regarding that hillock of clay. In another moment he was upon his feet, rifle in hand, striding rapidly forward with little attempt at concealment. He had rightly interpreted the signs. Whatever they were, the enemy was gone. To assure himself beyond a doubt before going back to report upon so important a matter, Searing pushed forward across the line of abandoned pits, running from cover to cover in the more open forest, his eyes vigilant to discover possible stragglers. He came to the edge of a plantation, one of those forlorn, deserted homesteads of the last years of the war, upgrown with brambles, ugly with broken fences, and desolate with vacant buildings, having blank apertures in place of doors and windows. After a keen reconnaissance from the safe seclusion of a clump of young pines, Searing ran lightly across a field and through an orchard to a small structure which stood apart from the other farm buildings on a slight elevation. This, he thought, would enable him to overlook a large scope of country in the direction which he supposed the enemy to have taken in withdrawing. This building, which had originally consisted of a single room elevated upon 4 posts about 10 feet high, was now little more than a roof. The floor had fallen away, the joists and planks loosely piled on the ground below or resting on end at various angles, not wholly torn from their fastenings above. The supporting posts were themselves no longer vertical. It looked as if the whole edifice would go down at the touch of a finger. Concealing himself in the debris of joists and flooring, Searing looked across the open ground between his point of view and a spur of Kennesaw Mountain a half-mile away. A road leading up and across the spur was crowded with troops, the rear guard of the retiring enemy, their gun barrels gleaming in the morning sunlight. Searing had now learned all that he could hope to know. It was his duty to return to his own command with all possible speed and report his discovery. But the gray column of Confederates toiling up the mountain road was singularly tempting. His rifle, an ordinary Springfield but fitted with a globe sight and a hair trigger, would easily send its 1.25 ounces of lead hissing into their midst. That would probably not affect the duration and result of the war, but it is the business of a soldier to kill. It is also his habit if he is a good soldier. Searing cocked his rifle and set the trigger. But it was decreed from the beginning of time that Private Searing was not to murder anybody that bright summer morning, nor was the Confederate retreat to be announced by him. For countless ages, events had been so matching themselves together in that wondrous mosaic to some parts of which, dimly discernible, we give the name of history, that the acts which he had in will would have marred the harmony of the pattern. Some 25 years previously, the power charged with the execution of the work according to the design had provided against that mischance by causing the birth of a certain male child in a little village at the foot of the Carpathian Mountains, had carefully reared it, supervised its education, directed its desires into a military channel, and in due time made it an officer of artillery. By the concurrence of an infinite number of favoring influences and their preponderance over an infinite number of opposing ones, this officer of artillery had been made to commit a breach of discipline and flee from his native country to avoid punishment. He had been directed to New Orleans instead of New York, where a recruiting officer awaited him on the wharf. He was enlisted and promoted, and things were so ordered that he now commanded a Confederate battery some 2 miles along the front from where Jerome Searing, the Federal scout, stood cocking his rifle. Nothing had been neglected. At every step in the progress of both these men's lives, and in the lives of their contemporaries and ancestors, and in the lives of the contemporaries of their ancestors, the right thing had been done to bring about the desired result. Had anything in all this vast concatenation been overlooked, Private Searing might have fired on the retreating Confederates that morning, and would perhaps have missed. As it fell out, a Confederate captain of artillery, having nothing better to do while awaiting his turn to pull out and be off, amused himself by sighting a field piece obliquely to his right at what he mistook for some Federal officers on the crest of a hill, and fired it. The shot flew high of its mark. As Jerome Searing drew back the hammer of his rifle, and with his eyes upon the distant Confederates considered where he could plant his shot with the best hope of making a widow or an orphan or a childless mother, perhaps all three, for Private Searing, although he had repeatedly refused promotion, was not without a certain kind of ambition. He heard a rushing sound in the air, like that made by the wings of a great bird swooping down upon its prey. More quickly than he could apprehend the gradation, it increased to a hoarse and horrible roar as the missile that made it sprang at him out of the sky, striking with a deafening impact one of the posts supporting the confusion of timbers above him, smashing it into matchwood and bringing down the whole crazy edifice with a loud clatter in a cloud of blinding dust. In one of the random chance occurrences of war, Jerome Searing has come in the way of a stray artillery shell that has missed its intended target, destroying the ruined building the Union scout was sheltering in as he prepared to engage the enemy with his loaded rifle musket. Has the scout survived this attack? And if so, what condition will he find himself in? Join us again tomorrow evening to find out here on BeFM Drama in Part 2 of One of the Missing.